Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Maryann. Petri. Patriots Against CPS Corruption invites you to attend our march for Texas children. DFPS has failed the families of Texas. The Texas Special Committee on DFPS has also failed to hear the parents and their children. Time to make our voices heard and surround yourself with those on the same mission as you. Join us on the March for Our Children, September 21st, 2022, starting at 1 p.m. at 701 West 51st Street, Austin, Texas, 78751. I have a return guest. I have Mr. Jay Rosenthal back on the show. He was last on, I believe, last month or so. We're going to discuss the alternative response. And it's a way of being pitched as child welfare's way of addressing disparities in the child welfare system. On a case-by-case basis, cases can be assigned to this alternate method of CPS involvement. The alternative response tends to have no determination of allegations, no court involvement, and focuses on putting in place CPS-contracted in-home prevention services to address safety concerns. When put like that, it does sound like a good idea. However, the truth, that's just not what it seems. The alternative response is already present in most states and is expected to become the most common type of CPS involvement in America within the next 5 years. I welcome you, Mr. Jay Rosenthal of CPSprotect.com.
Thank you, Maryann. I'm glad to be back. So the alternative response is part of a bigger framework known as differential response. And this was written into the Child Abuse Prevention Act back when it was recertified in 2010, 2011. And it's mostly been in beta. There are 23 states that have laws on the books for the alternative response, and another 7 that have actually tried some variation of it. Now, the idea is that families are different, circumstances are different, CPS cases should not all be treated the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, differential response. The typical alternative response investigation tends to have a few features. It is more often neglect. It does not typically have a determination. So whatever the allegations are, they don't substantiate, they don't unsubstantiate. It is focused more on services. The idea, the pitch that the child welfare is actually making here is, as you said, there have been some disparities. Removal is not necessarily great. So let's focus on keeping the family together, preserving them, and addressing the safety concerns in the home without ripping a family apart.
Mm-hmm.
It all sounds great and like it's going in the right direction. And normally on the surface, I would say this is great news. However, there are some particularly valid concerns when it comes to the alternative response. And that is these CPS contracted agencies. So prevention services are a variety of therapeutic services, parenting skills, vocational training, and otherwise provided in-home by CPS contractors as defined in the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act. Now, these prevention services are like foster care, reimbursed according to Title 4E of the Social Security Act.
Mhm.
So what ends up happening is when prevention services comes in, they are acting on behalf of CPS. Now, in an alternative response CPS case, here's how it might go. Case for neglect is called in, it meets the criteria for alternative response and is assigned alternative response. This would typically happen at the hotline level where they're doing intake, but it could happen at the local office. It could be assigned to the alternative response, or it could even be the supervisor who decides that it should be an alternative response case. So these tend to be scheduled. They don't make a determination. They do the typical investigation in the sense that they identify the safety concerns, and then they identify the services and implement them to address the safety concerns. Now, these contractors are being paid by CPS.
Mhm.
So what ends up happening is if if they miss something and something happens and they don't report it to CPS, they could lose that contract. And these service providers are also mandated reporters. So essentially, you have mandated reporters that are providing in-home services, and this could be for therapy, for domestic violence counseling, for parenting skills training, whatever it is, and it could be for, it could be 3 days a week, it could be 1 day a week, it could be 2 days a week, it could be for an hour, it could be for 3 hours, it could be for 5 hours. It depends on the service. So what ends up happening is I see families not actually feeling safe in their own homes because it raises the question of whose kids are they? Are they
Mhm.
yours or are they the government's? Because one mistake that I see families make all the time when it comes to CPS, uh, and this goes for those who are usually clueless as to why a removal has occurred or why a case has been substantiated. When it comes to CPS, when they come in, they're making their assessment based on how the government defines a good home and how the government defines a good parent, not
Mhm.
yours. Their definition may be, their terms may be unreasonable, how they define them. Yours may be reasonable, but they may be different. And if
Mhm.
they're different, they're not playing by your rules. They're playing by their own.
Mhm.
And you're playing by theirs too, whether you like it or not. That is that is the biggest mistake that I see families make, and that's why it's so easy to step on a mine in the minefield that is a CPS investigation.
Mhm.
But here, when you have mandated reporters who are coming and providing in-home services and could report to CPS at any time, and are CPS contractors, there's always that sinking feeling of if I teach my child my values, am I going to get another investigation? And
Mhm.
then, of course, I'm sure this question is on your viewer's mind. What happens if I refuse prevention services? Well,
Mhm.
if there are any safety concerns, then it's going to switch to a traditional investigation, which means there's going to be a determination. So you're gambling. You could end up on the registry. Removal could be on the table. Court could be an option. And the question is going to be, when there's so much at stake, how many people are going to be willing to risk that? And my guess is not many. So what's going to happen is, with a low threshold for reporting, I believe there will be an increase in yearly CPS reports above what it is now. And if we go by the 2019 numbers, there were 4.4 million reports made to child abuse hotlines in the United States in federal fiscal year 2019. 2.2 million were investigated. They met the criteria. So we might end up seeing it even higher than that as a result of this. And it will be harder and harder and harder to get CPS out of your house. This, this will not just affect those in the lower class. This will affect everybody, because what happens is the majority of what the upper class has to really hedge themselves against a lot of this is the ability to more easily afford attorneys.
Mhm.
But if you're avoiding court and you're just focusing on services like this, well, what's left? Uh, I could not possibly come up with a better pitch for CPS Protect's preemptive consultation, and along with our home assessment and risk assessment, simply because if you can be prepared and know what you need to do to navigate and get through this with as little disruption, intrusion, and fear as possible, and as little time as possible, then it makes it a lot easier. Because if you go through CPS and you comply the first time, and then something else comes back and a prior history has been established, it's much more difficult to get out of that hole.
Mhm.
And I foresee that being a very common problem going forward. In New York, they have started increasing the number of alternative response units and decreasing the number of traditional response units. New York tends to be the incubator for a lot of new uh, policies in child welfare. What happens there tends to spread to the rest of the country. My best estimate is that this will become the norm for almost, if not every state in the country within the next 5 years. I could be wrong. I look forward to listening to this 5 years from now
Mhm.
and seeing just how accurate I was. This is not one of those times that I want to be right, but it's one where I'm pretty darn confident.
Mhm. Well, and like you said, with New York implementing this already, I'm sure other states are going to follow. And I would think, I don't know, I'm pretty jaded, but it would be very scary to raise a family at present time.
Absolutely. It really is. And one thing that some of your viewers may recognize who have been under CPS investigation is CPS investigators, partially because they're running on very strict timelines. There are a lot of reports coming in. Uh, they don't actually have the time to explain to you how the government defines their terms, so you don't really know the standard that you're supposed to be meeting. And because many of these terms are very ambiguous and have very low specificity, it leaves them up to interpretation. And that leads to a lot of issues. But now here, the question is where, other than we're not increasing the help that we're offering, we're decreasing the help. The resistance is being decreased here.
Mhm. Now, it's these caseworkers, you know, so there's going to be more of them checking up on families. All, like you said, it could be every day, it could be twice a week, it could be for several hours a day. A parent can't relax in their own home or even discipline their child if they have to, if there is a CPS babysitter in there for a while.
Well, it's not that they can't discipline their child. It would be they should probably check CPS policy first before disciplining their child,
Yeah. Yeah.
is what it's going to be. But if it's difficult enough to sleep at night when you're under investigation by CPS,
Mhm.
this is going to change the game. And what it comes down to is this is the war over over who possesses the children, and this is the next frontier. At the During the pandemic, the parents brought it to the schools as the schools came home, and they got a window into some of the happenings at school that they weren't necessarily told about. And now, today, here we are, where child welfare is saying removals have gotten politically inconvenient in most cases. So we're going to shift to and make it look nice, but it's not going to do anything to promote parental rights. And I think, I think that's really serious, because if things weren't structured the way they were, I think trying to preserve families more and provide them with what they need, I don't think that that idea itself is inherently bad, but I think the design is not going to bode well for parental rights. I think I think most people would say that if you can keep a family together and the child is not clearly being abused, I think you should probably make the effort to do that. But this is so much more than that, and I think that's why this should really be a concern. Nobody's really talking about it because people are hearing, that this is great, and you hear so many stories about separation that were just disasters, because it just the question as to whether separation was actually necessary and for what period of time is is a very common debate. So here with this, when it is a potentially very scary time for parental rights, and I would hope that we would take another look at this before this comes into full swing. Unfortunately, I don't see the momentum slowing down from here on in. And I've never seen anything with the word welfare in it get smaller in this country.
No, once it's going like a train.
Absolutely. It's so the alternative response, not everybody is going to be subjected to it, but I do believe it will become the norm. And more often than not, by the time people realize that it's not as pure an intent as as is thought, it may turn into an issue. Because ultimately, this may also turn into a religious rights issue. Because what if in a state the CPS policy and religion are in conflict? There was just a case that was at the Supreme Court that got turned back concerning Yeshiva University and an LGBT club. And Yeshiva University is an Orthodox Jewish university that has certain values. Now, whatever you believe on either side with the First Amendment protecting freedom of religion, the question is Yeshiva University a religious institution or an educational institution? And it's both, but which is it first? And New York says it is an educational institution first and a religious institution second. So it looks like they may end up allowing this LGBT club. I'm not getting anywhere near the debate on that itself, but overall, the issue becomes that if you have certain values that whether they're progressive or not, whether they're religious or not, but they are not of the party in charge of the executive branch in your respective state, this may make it very difficult for you to instill the values that you want in your children.
Yeah, that's what I would be afraid of. Because when CPS entered my life, that also involved attorneys trying to get you out of this mess, and then an attorney telling you, I don't think I just stop taking your kid to church. It's just making things worse.
Well, yeah, because what happens is in the family court, the family court is not making a determination, when the child is removed. CPS has already made that determination. They've already essentially substantiated the case. If they haven't substantiated it and they've removed the child, even if they haven't formally substantiated it, they've essentially said that they couldn't keep you together.
Mhm.
And therefore there was something very bad going on that you were doing. So what happens is the family court isn't even looking at that. What the family court is looking at is these are the safety concerns that CPS has brought up. The child can't be returned until the court has determined that the safety concerns have been addressed.
Mhm.
And so the question isn't even, are you guilty or not? The question is, have you addressed the safety concerns or not, to the point that the child can be safe returning home? That's the question. That's the question in family court.
Mhm.
So let's be very clear. They're not determining your guilt. Custodial abuse and neglect were decriminalized in the 1960s. That's why this can be heard in the family and juvenile courts. If it was criminal, it would be heard in the criminal court. And you see this in more serious cases like child sexual abuse, where there actually is a criminal component to it, and CPS tends to deal with it in the family or juvenile court, and the criminal aspect, the police will be involved, and it will be dealt with separately in criminal court. There's a reason for that. Custodial abuse and neglect in the United States are not criminal. They're illegal. They're not criminal.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of parents don't know the ins and outs of this until they go through it themselves. Is what people are not getting.
Well, that's a really good point. And it really boils down to the idea that if you're not really actively thinking about it, child protection in its simplest and purest form is a noble cause. We should want to protect the most vulnerable of our society. We should want them to be safe. And children are among the most vulnerable in our society. We should want them to be safe and be able to grow and learn and develop into adults that can be productive contributors to our society, start their own families, and really, really lead long, fulfilling lives. That's that's the ideal scenario, I think, for, at least for most parents who have children.
Mhm.
That's typically what they want. They want better for them than they had. So the idea that they so obviously they're not thinking CPS is evil. They're thinking child protection is an inherent good. This is ridiculous. And some of the people who are telling their stories, they must be terrible, because if they got caught abusing or neglecting their child, well, that is a serious concern. So you're right that a lot of people do not necessarily delve deeply into this until they've already been through it. And unfortunately, that is a very costly mistake. And
Mhm.
it's one that I wish that people didn't make, and that people actually looked at this a lot more closely, a lot earlier, and took the precautions that they need to make this right,
Mhm.
and to keep them safe. It's literally, that's why I developed the preemptive consultation. I mean, with the home assessment and the risk assessment, it costs $150 less than the cheapest iPhone 14. Uh, it would be if CPS shows up at your door, it's essentially the best $600 you've ever spent, because
Mhm.
one mistake with CPS and that involvement causes a lifetime and a half of anguish.
Mhm. And emotional duress, stress, and even a heart attack.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have seen, I've spoken with families that after a CPS investigation, they've turned much more into helicopter parents, and they've always watched their back because they're like, anybody could be the next person to call CPS on me. And
Mhm.
then this starts all over again. I don't want to do that. I don't want that to happen. And it changes the trajectory. They have difficulty actually letting go of their children, letting them have some space, letting them have some of their own independence, and that can actually affect child development.
Mhm.
There are very serious implications that are not often talked about.
And the thing is, with these caseworkers, a lot of them don't even have kids of their own, and they're coming into your home and telling you how to parent yours.
Well, that's a tough one. I didn't have kids when I did investigations either. But at the same time, I was using the government standards, so it didn't really matter whether I had kids or not.
Mhm.
I wasn't using my own standard for how I might go about child rearing, for example.
Mhm.
So I'm not actually sure how relevant that was,
Mhm.
but I understand why you say that. Because when you have a child, it changes your entire worldview. Your priorities change, uh, how you shop changes, uh, who gets saved in a fire first, uh, considerations for travel everywhere. A child changes the priority structure uh, and what you value in life pretty dramatically as soon as they're in the picture. So I
Mhm.
understand why you say that. And it's a very valid point that you're making. But in terms of actually executing CPS policy, I don't know how relevant it actually is.
Well, the ones that I've dealt with, I don't know what policy they were following. I've talked to other parents that are having issues. I don't know if these caseworkers are following policy when they're wearing hot pink t-shirts that on the back of the t-shirt it says, "Do you know where your kids are?" And in the front it said child kidnappers or kidnappers,
I
professional
I
kidnappers.
I remember this. This was an office. This made national news. This
Mm-hmm.
was it 2020 or 2021?
21.
It was an office in the Arizona Division of Child Safety, and they they took a group photo and posted it on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was probably their coping mechanism as a joke for whatever,
Wow.
internally, for just coping with it. I don't condone it, obviously. It is not the way that I look at this,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately, almost everyone in that office was fired.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is it made Arizona DCS look bad. And if you make your superiors look bad, that's how you get fired. It's a lot harder to get rid of a civil servant almost any other way.
Mm-hmm.
If they are a liability to the child welfare agency, then it's much easier for them to cut a union employee loose.
Mm-hmm.
But short of that, it is very difficult to fire a civil servant. There are very strong protections. Um, the There's a lot of favoritism. A lot of it is about, for example, promotion is about making making the right friends, kissing up to the right people.
Mhm.
When I started working at CPS back in the day, I had I had said out loud as soon as I arrived at the office, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to do my job. That
Mhm.
was my first mistake. I was a terrible civil servant. I was a great employee. I was a terrible civil servant.
Mm.
Uh, so in that type of environment, it's obviously very easy for corruption to occur. Uh, what happened in Arizona DCS, you see teachers in schools talk smack about kids and parents in the break room. Uh, it's normal. It's normal to assume that you might see something similar in a child welfare office. Granted, if that's going to happen, you should not be doing that publicly. You should be treating you should be treating people with respect and acknowledge that this is a very sensitive issue. You can't just go and mock it. And
Mhm.
I think that that's really where the issue is the Arizona DCS employees, if they were making a joke behind closed doors, as dark as it is, I
Mhm.
don't think it's very different than you have in most professions. Some people may not want to hear that, but unfortunately, humans can be particularly catty. Uh, but you have to understand what you represent and the gravity of what your job entails. And that's clearly what this group did not understand.
Mhm.
So, just in case it's not already clear, I condemn the actions of those Arizona DCS workers. What they did was clearly inappropriate, and DCS took appropriate action in firing them for what they did.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any respect for CPS. There, I said it. I just
No,
don't.
no, it's absolutely okay. As I said on the last episode, CPS is a government agency, and people seem to expect that because it deals with children, it's supposed to be more morally upstanding, more competent, have less contempt for you than the DMV or the IRS. Have you ever tried to get your driver's license renewed? And
Yeah.
really, you expect a child welfare agency in the same state to actually be more effective? This always amazes me is
Mhm.
whenever I use this example, people are at a loss for words.
Mhm.
And I keep wondering why. And then we ask for more government to fix it. If they weren't fixing it the first time, I think you need to rethink things. And
Mhm.
that's where you start talking about actual reform. And I think it would be a travesty if I came on the show and I was talking about this, and I see a lot of people talk about abolish CPS, but they really don't have a substitute. And as long as human beings have free will, they're going to have the free will to do good, and they're going to have the free will to do evil. And there are some people that actually do terrible things to children.
Mhm.
Uh, Granted, they are a minority of cases, but this is one of the few times where CPS can actually do its job. I have seen in my experience there really are cases like this, but they are by far not the majority. So that being said, how actually should we manage child protection in the United States? I think that's an
Mhm.
important discussion to have.
Mhm.
If you understand the history of child welfare, and one thing you'll understand is that the government didn't really do investigations until the 1960s. Their involvement was minimal. Uh, there was originally the first Child Protective Service was founded in 1875. It was the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Unfortunately, nowadays they've been relegated to a prevention services provider for the New York City agency, ACS, and uh, a place for training for mandated reporters. But what they used to do was child protective services. They were started by wealthy benefactors, Henry Berg and Elbridge Gerry, the head of the ASPCA and the founder and the legal counsel, uh, respectively. And they founded the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. By 1925, there were 480 of these local societies. And custodial abuse and neglect was considered criminal at this point. So the way it tended to work, granted, this was pre-civil rights, so this was not exactly clean, but the society would receive the report. They would do the investigation. These were these were private organizations in the community that are easier to hold accountable than the government, and they would investigate. And if if there was abuse or neglect, they would go to the local criminal court with the police and get a warrant for the arrest of the alleged subjects, and they would have to be tried in the criminal court. And this is the way that it tended to work until the 1960s, when custodial abuse and neglect were decriminalized, the juvenile and family courts were created. At the same time, the network of SPCCs, Societies for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, were starting to falter. Some were just losing funding and closing. Others didn't have enough personnel. And so what happened was the state started developing their own central registries and picking up the mantle, then delegating CPS responsibilities to their own social services agencies. And over the next 20 years, by the 1980s, CPS was a government entity in all 50 states. And that is CPS today. I think what we need to, there are two things that we actually need to do if we want to have good child protection. I think we need to have wealthy benefactors in our communities slowly but surely reestablish the societies for the prevention of cruelty to children in a post-civil rights world. I think we need to decriminalize child abuse and neglect and use a similar model where there are stronger protections in the family court, and promote referrals to community-based organizations, people in private practice, for for those who can't really afford it, those that take Medicaid, for example, because you can hold these agencies accountable more easily if they are local societies. Local communities tend to be more homogenous in their values, so it should be reflective of their values. And overall, that would be the best way to do it, because then the government corruption that is an issue and in some ways makes them untouchable kind of goes away. And I think that's what we need to see. However, as I said, I've never seen anything with the word welfare in it ever shrink in the United States. I've only seen it grow. And it means that, let's be realistic, even if everything is done right today, perfectly, I wouldn't see this even starting to be an option until 15, 20 years from now. This is an enormous undertaking. I don't want to say it's a pipe dream, but I think that if you're actually going to protect children and have some sort of infrastructure to do it, I think this is what you need. If there's a better proposal that you have or someone else has, I'm happy to hear it, but this is the best that I can come up with based on my experience.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep rabbit hole once you start trying to figure out what exactly to do with these people. I mean, I like what you just said.
Yeah, at this point, trying to actually decrease the power of government
Mm-hmm.
is not easy. We've seen during the COVID pandemic, why there's a saying, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Mhm.
And it is particularly concerning, and that's why I was on here today talking about the alternative response. Is
Mhm.
quite simply, now we have a bit of a heads up here, and
Mhm.
we can take action, whether it's in legislation, or it's getting a preemptive consultation with CPS Protect to protect your family and preserve your rights. We have some time to actually work on this here and maybe not have worst case scenario realized. And I mean, even if the alternative response does occur, maybe worst case scenario doesn't occur. As I said, I hope I'm wrong,
Mhm.
but I think that now that we know that there's a potential serious issue here, I think we need to actually do something about it. And if we don't, either for our families, or or on a larger level, then we're wasting an opportunity.
Mhm.
With CPS Protect, I'm doing what I can.
Mhm.
I am. Uh, so I left CPS to start CPS Protect to do the right thing,
Mhm.
but we need more people doing the right thing, and we need more people taking care of themselves, taking care of the legislation here. So I hope that this episode reaches as far as possible to really get people to actually take advantage of the information that they have right now, because if they don't, I don't like the way that this could turn out.
Mhm.
It really is genuinely concerning.
Mhm. So if I was your cousin and I had maybe 2 kids, we'll say ages 3 and 5, and I said, "Well, I don't know, my one friend just had CPS at their door. What should I do, Jay?" You know, what would you advise?
Well, in those cases, that's a really big question. I mean, first thing I would do is say, get in touch with CPS Protect Consulting Services, get a preemptive consultation, a home assessment, and a risk assessment, just because that is the best way that you can be prepared and know what you have to do. Because when CPS shows up at your door, you're not in the right frame of mind. You're
Mhm.
scared because you recognize what CPS represents and what the potential consequences of their presence could be, which are, I tend to I tend to refer to CPS investigations as among the most frightening experiences any parent can endure.
Mhm.
And I think it's true. What would you say? Is it?
Yeah, in fact, when I let a CPS caseworker in, um, I thought, of course, you can see by the house, it's clean. She looked in the refrigerator. She walked around, and then she sat down, and then she proceeded to scream at me for 2.5 hours straight.
Yeah, that's not right. That's someone who's stressed and clearly not in the right frame of mind. And need I actually say that was unprofessional? Uh,
Right, right. Oh, and the thing was, she didn't really talk about my kids. She was more concerned about my ex-husband's finances, is what she was screaming at me about. Mhm.
I
Because
just
yes, because his wife worked in the courthouse, and something was drummed up, and I just went down that rabbit hole. It was just a big mess.
uh, it typically is, especially when you're going it alone.
Mhm.
That really becomes a very a very serious issue. You've seen that in this minefield, if you don't know exactly what CPS's standards are, then even if you get a good worker, how do you actually meet those standards?
Hmm.
That's really serious. Not only that, how do you know what the consequences are? How do you know what time you have? What is the risk
Hmm.
of you actually going to court, or or to have services if you sign something, if you don't? Should you sign a HIPAA form? Should you not? How should you
Hmm.
actually interact? Should you let them in? Should you not? At what point should you? It's so strategically, you're really blind, and on top of that, you're scared. You're on high alert. So you're not even thinking clearly to begin with.
Hmm.
That's why with CPS Protect, the personalized plans are so important.
Hmm.
Is when you have actually these written templates that identify the safety concerns that you would hopefully resolve, that CPS would look for, and you
Hmm.
see, okay, this is what you need to do. This is in the situation. This is how you do it. Then you don't actually have to think as hard,
Hmm.
and it makes it easier to strategically make the right decisions and get through it and feel relieved when CPS finally leaves.
Hmm.
When you Because part of what's so scary about CPS is not just the uncertainty, but that you don't have enough information on how the investigation is actually conducted
Hmm.
to make an assessment of what your risk currently is of an adverse outcome. It's really difficult to make that determination.
Yeah. So, so, oh, can't even talk. Wait a minute. CPSprotect.com, people would contact you and say, I don't know, is this like, an insurance plan? Is this like, in case something weird should happen with
It
this
is
happening?
it is a just in case preparation
Hmm.
for the possibility. It's the kind of thing that you would rather have and not need than need and not have. Because
Hmm.
nobody wants CPS to show up at their door. But if CPS shows up at your door, you want them out as quickly as possible with as little disruption, intrusion, and fear as possible. You want them out that door, you want them out of your life.
Hmm.
But so what this does is this says, you know what to do. You know what
Hmm.
you have to do when they show up. The mask is off. You can get them out. You can keep yourself safe. You can keep your children safe. You've met the standard.
Hmm.
That's what it says. Essentially, when people ask me what CPS Protect actually sells and what the service is, people say, uh, sometimes I say, we help families prepare for and navigate child protective services investigations. Well, that's technically true. What we actually sell is peace of mind,
Hmm.
because this is going through what we offer is the difference between a whole lot of sleepless nights and maybe a few sleepless nights, between 18 months of involvement and 60 days.
Hmm.
That's the big thing, is we're not attorneys, we're strategy consultants who are former CPS investigators and know what the expectations are. We know what's going to be pushed for. We know what's not. There was never Before this year, there was never anything like this. So essentially, if you look at all the reform that's occurred and all the activism, it obviously hasn't been enough. The whole reason I did this was, if activism wasn't enough, then maybe social entrepreneurship might be. Because if enough people come to us, and obviously there aren't enough substantiated cases, or people aren't accepting prevention services, they're getting things elsewhere, then and safety concerns aren't being identified, then what happens is the Title IV-E funding that's coming in comes down. And that actually, if there are enough people that are coming to us and becoming more educated and implementing these plans, then it's going to force a conversation on real reform.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe social entrepreneurship plus activism actually results in the change that we want to see. I'm trying to be the change I want to see in the world. I don't know a lot of people who would do that. It comes with a lot of risk and it comes with a lot of difficulty. It's not easy, but that's why I'm here.
That's why I'm here too, because, like I said before, until this travesty happens to you, you won't get it. Because I mean, before all this happened to me, I just really thought, I was untouchable. I had a good career. I had everything going for me. And then before you know it, it all can be taken away.
That's why we serve the entire United States. We're reachable by phone, we're reachable by email, we're reachable on our website, on social media. We've tried to make ourselves as accessible as possible.
Mm-hmm.
This really is a very serious issue, and I see no sign of it changing. And sometimes if you want to get something done, you got to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if I had, like I said, a 3-year-old or 5-year-old and I was your cousin, I would definitely call you up and just have you do a home assessment or something, just to have some type of knowledge of what is going to happen when they show up, because it's just a matter of time. They said, I've heard it said that CPS will affect 1 out of 3 families.
There was a 10-year longitudinal study published in the American Journal of Public Health in 2017. And what they found is that 37.4%, that's almost 4 in 10 children in the United States, will be subject to a CPS investigation before they hit the age of 18. That's almost 4 in 10 children.
That's just terrible.
It is, because what it means is that the threshold for reporting is extraordinarily low.
Mm-hmm.
Because the average rate of substantiated cases is 29.7%. That's not taking into account, alternative response cases where there are, which is a piece of that pie, that don't have a determination that might otherwise be substantiated. But the rate of substantiation nationwide is 29.7%, so almost
Mm-hmm.
30. That means that 3 in 10 cases end up being substantiated. Now, in order for there to be enough substantiated cases for the amount of stories that you have, obviously there has to be a very large amount of investigations. And in order to have that, there has to be a very low threshold for reporting.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I'm glad you came on, to warn us all about what is happening and is going to happen in Blossom, and just take over. We're going to have the government in our homes.
It's a really scary prospect. I mean, what I would say is, if you really are concerned and you do want to protect yourself and you are interested, visit our website at CPSprotect.com. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can email us at contact@CPSprotect.com or give us a call at 844-633-KIDS. That's 633-5437.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll have you back on again. Is there any other advice you would like to leave us with?
I would say that if you know that something is about to change in CPS, taking steps to protect your family, which actually should include as we see uh, political polarization become particularly prevalent in the US. I think a question that a lot of us need to ask is, does the executive branch of my state, do they represent my values as a parent? And if not, should I consider this a safe environment to raise my child in?
Mhm.
I think that's a question that we are all going to need to ask. And if it's not, I think we're going to have a very serious conversation about where we should live.
Mhm.
This is going to, this is really going to change things. I don't like that I'm saying this. We shouldn't be making that decision based on our values for our children and what other people think about it. But I think that we are in an environment where that does have to be a discussion.
Mhm. Well, and then there's people that don't want to discuss it because they don't think it can happen to them. I think you're frozen. Oh, no. Oh, are you there? Oh, man. Oh, okay, you're back.
Okay, you froze.
Yeah, you froze too. I'm going, "Oh, no." Oh, you were in the middle of saying something really good.
Where did the recording end? We can duplicate it.
That
I'll tell you what.
fudge.
Ask your last question, and I'll respond to it. So cut everything out that I said after and your last question. Ask your
Mhm.
last question, and we'll add it onto the rest of the recording. Can you
Okay.
do that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So, the problem is that people don't want to hear it. They because they don't think it will happen to them. They just really don't. They're sitting ducks. That won't happen to me. And what do you say to that? You try to tell them and they just don't want to hear it.
My typical response to people who say that is, I hope you're right. Because if you're not, the consequences could be pretty severe.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll just have to see how things go. And I'd like to have you back on the podcast. And so don't jump off, okay? Sla-
Absolutely.
Slam the Gavel's a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption. Please join us again here with Jay Rosenthal and other exciting guests. Thank you again, Jay.
My pleasure.